And get started here. So again, welcome to Creative Circle's second Conversations with Creatives. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Creative Circle, but if this is the first time you're having the opportunity to learn a little bit about us, I wanted to let you know that Creative Circle is a marketing and creative services company, and we help candidates find their next opportunity while partnering with clients to find solutions for their business challenges. And that looks like a variety of different ways. We connect people to projects by building flex bench teams, by providing studio or agency services, filling those those full-time roles, and then of course, introducing subject matter experts to clients who are looking for consulting partners. And I think that's a great way to also talk about the subject matter experts who are going to be joining us today for, again, our second Conversations with Creatives, AI and Design. And I wanted to take a quick pause here to talk about the goal in today's session and truly in this whole webinar series that we've been putting on. I'm actually going to ask Kevin to go ahead and add in our artificial intelligence page that lives on our Creative Circle website. This is a wonderful information hub that is updated regularly with different case studies, with what we're hearing from clients, what we're hearing from industry experts, truly. And it's a really subversive experience. You can read so many different articles about how AI is working within different fields in the creative and marketing industry. And we want to acknowledge that sometimes this artificial intelligence, this new technology can be somewhat intimidating, dare I say scary. But the goal in us having these conversations is really to talk more about it and make it more accessible for creatives like ourselves to start adapting different practices. And we're going to be hearing from two very well-versed AI experts, if I will. But I did want to share that this webinar does contain some general information about AI legal issues. This was a question that we saw a lot in our first webinar. And we're also going to be sharing some developments in the law for informational purposes only. So Creative Circle is not providing official legal advice on any particular set of facts here, any circumstances or situations that you may find yourself. We're just sharing information. So I'm thrilled to introduce our panelists today. Each are actually experts in artificial intelligence in two very different but very important areas. So we have Andrew, a creative director here, a return guest who uses AI in design and work for his clients. And we have Mark, an attorney who specializes in generative AI issues. Andrew, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself today and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Andrew Mörner. I'm a partner and the creative director here at Pillar LA. We're a full house, in-house creative and digital marketing agency based in Los Angeles here. And I think really our strength lies in blending good creative with performance marketing. We like to use a mix of storytelling and proprietary tech for clients like Jones Soda, Cheech and Chong, Mike Tyson, and other big players in the cannabis, entertainment, and CPG markets. So yeah, thanks so much for having me here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome, Andrew. And you gave us a little sneak peek on some of the visuals that we're going to be exploring today. So I'm really excited. Mark, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Sure. I'm a lawyer with the law firm of K&L Gates. It's a global law firm, offices in 48 cities around the world, about 2,000 lawyers. I myself am in Seattle. I've been in practice for roughly 35 years, and I focus on intellectual property and technology transactions issues. And in the last 2 years, I've really focused on artificial intelligence issues in basically technology development and also works by artists and the use of AI technologies by various artistic fields and media. In addition to what I'll call my paying practice, I am an active volunteer with a group called Washington Lawyers for the Arts, and I teach an arts legal clinic at Seattle University Law School. I see literally hundreds of artists every year and help them pro bono with legal questions and legal questions about the use of AI, and generating artworks are just starting to come in. So I've really enjoyed sort of getting to learn this field. It's very, in terms of the legal issues, it's very new and very interesting because it's completely unsettled, as people will hear. So
Absolutely. So many developments that are in the works right now and things that we were learning just as we were preparing for this webinar. So very excited to hear more. We're actually going to start with Andrew here and talk a little bit about using AI in creative and how you're specifically using AI as a designer. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your use of artificial intelligence in your current role.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's like, what do we not use AI for at this point? I think that's more the question. We use it for a lot. It helps augment our creative processes and just our like ones that we use for the agency that aren't creative. So, I mean, starting with ChatGPT and more recently Claude 3, which is a recent player in the space. My opinion is sort of edging out over ChatGPT at this point. We use it for as a like sort of a thinking partner. So anything that is relating to a project with clients, text, um, talking about a creative brief, just mapping, starting anything, using these text prompts, using these text LLMs to really as a thinking partner is really powerful for us. And then second, of course, all of these image generation tools, Midjourney, Dolly 3, right? Like any of these tools that can create images and now that are coming up soon that we'll be able to create video are really powerful for us. They're not like creating our end results per se. Of course, we are having a huge hand in that, but it just helps along the process. So it really, in every stage of the process, it acts as our thinking partner and our creative execution partner.
I love that, titling it your thinking partner. And something that you'd mentioned in prior conversations is really using AI as a way to get through ideas. And you already said it's not the result that you're really leaning on. It's not necessarily a good way to get new ideas, but it's helping you through that entire creative process. What would you say are like some pros and cons in using AI from your experience?
Yeah. So starting with some of the pros, I mean, it's so easy just to turn up the nozzle and just let creativity flow and run through ideas so quickly. I mean, if you just think about the amount that it can generate and the time that it can generate, it can create nearly at the speed of thought, or at least as fast as your fingers can type, right? If you want to come up with some ideas about what would a design look like if I did it this way, or even you could apply it to any industry, architecture, whatever, like come up with the image where the guy is on the left hand side and the product is on the right, or switch them. Make sure that like try different camera angles, different depths of field. Like there's so many things you can do with it. So it just turning up the creativity nozzle, I would say just the amount of ideas you can churn through, really great. Second, it really challenges you to think outside of the box. Like if you can describe it in words, the better you can describe it in words, rather, the more accurate the image is on the other side. So really, like these tools are making you be a better thinker. If you type in a crappy prompt, a crappy result will come out. It forces you to re-examine, okay, what am I actually typing? Like, what is the subject matter? How do I want the subject matter to appear? What style is it in? Like all of these things. So it really makes you think through these questions. Some of the negatives, really, as it stands currently, and this could change, AI models had to receive a certain set of training data to exist. Anything that is currently being outputted from Midjourney had to be trained into it. So, you just tend to you tend to make iterations on work that has already existed, that has been used as training data. So again, like I wouldn't say that the negative is that you shouldn't be using it in every single step of your creative process. It's merely a thinking partner. You can use parts of it for your final result, but don't rely on it to just execute something and be like, okay, done. I didn't change it at all, right? So just know that it's based off of things that already exist, and creativity sometimes requires you to step outside that box. And then the last thing is, as a negative, is sometimes it can replace the highly beneficial process of thinking through a problem yourself. Really identifying what is good or bad about a design. Don't always let the computer or the AI do the thinking. There's a reason that the creative industry, that becoming a creative, whether you're an illustrator, a graphic designer, a videographer, you have to learn the principles of hierarchy, contrast, gestalt theory, things that make a design good. Why does it look good when you like make body copy this point size and then 3x for the header? Like, why is that contrast? You have to understand the rules. And I think that if you're leaning on an AI to make those decisions for you, you're losing some of that process of learning.
Yeah. And you've talked too about like the benefits of going almost like analog, pen and paper, to be another part of that creative partner with you, to bring it out of AI and come back and almost like check yourself a little bit to ensure that you're staying on the rails here with all of the tools and the foundational pieces that you've learned about design.
Yeah, sketch on pen and paper. That's a really good point. Like, don't just look at this as the cure for all of your design work or needs. Like, the pen and paper is more often than not the best way to get out an idea quick. AI can really, I mean, it's like a very advanced form of pen and paper, but it's just that they're sketches sometimes. I mean, like, take a walk, go outside, grab a piece of pen and paper, like get inspired by things that are outside of the box, but also don't be afraid to use AI as a tool. So I would say it's a balance.
Yeah. You and I talked briefly too about Rick Rubin wrote The Creative Act, and he, being such an incredible music producer, you're so in technology and those boards and everything. And he shared in that book and in interviews afterwards how like he loved swimming laps to get through these different ideas. So a really nice pairing, a really nice balance between the analog and technology. I've seen a couple questions in the chat about the tools that you've mentioned. So I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are some of your favorite tools at the moment? I even recognize that a few of them have changed since our last conversation. So what is, on your playlist right now?
Yeah, so really my go-to image creation tool is going to be Midjourney version 6. Midjourney has recently had a development with version 6. I think the last one was on 5.2 or something, and then they made a jump to version 6. Incredible text coherence. You can write prompts that are so long, like you can write essays to it, and it can adhere, if you're writing them correctly, it can adhere to that text. I mean, it's something that we haven't seen before, because more often than not, it was a bit of a roll of the dice. If you're using certain image generators such as DALL-E 3 or even DALL-E 2 and Midjourney previous versions, but with version 6, it's like it blows it out of the water. I mean, it's incredible the level of detail you can get with Midjourney V6. So that's the first tool I would say. The second one that's like a sort of a second tier, in my opinion, image generator is DALL-E 3 that comes with ChatGPT. And the only one I'm recommending this one to, I would say like just use Midjourney. Don't even consider DALL-E 3. But the power of DALL-E 3 is that you can craft a very simple prompt, and ChatGPT will interpret that prompt and bolster it and then send it to DALL-E 3. So there's a bit of like a middleman process going on. Now, you can see that middleman process is like, well, I'm losing some control if it doesn't let me articulate what I want to do. And that's true. But if you use DALL-E 3 for image generation, you can look at the prompts that it's submitting and study how it writes its prompts, and then apply that to any image generator you want. So I'd say it's really good for the learning process of understanding how to write great prompts, and having a chat GPT there to help you and assist you in creating those images. So I'd say both are useful. So we covered Midjourney V6 and DALL-E 3. The next two, I guess before I dive into the chatbots, the last tangent that's a design one is Photoshop's generative AI tool. Extremely useful for in painting. So if you have an image that needs to be extended vertically, horizontally, you need to select a subject. Maybe someone's holding a banana and you want them to be holding a bottle of Coke. You can use your lasso tool and select that little area and say, have them be holding a can of soda. Like it's very hyper nuanced like changes to all of your images. It's something that Midjourney V6 doesn't give you, that's native to Photoshop with their new generative AI tool. I mean, it's been out a little bit now since we last talked about it, but it's an extremely powerful tool. So I'd recommend that one too. And then last, to touch on the chatbots, ChatGPT, of course, I'm sure many people are aware of now, but more recently, Claude 3 released their latest Opus model, and in my opinion, is more accurate and more succinct and more professional sounding than GPT. And the answers that I get from Claude 3 are far and away more impressive. So those are all the tools that I'm currently using.
Thank you. And we're actually going to see some of these tools in action. Thank you so much for sharing this, the visuals. So while I actually pull that up, do you want to talk us a little bit about this project that you're open to sharing to our for our webinar today?
Yeah, absolutely. If we can bring up the slide, I'd love to show a little bit behind the curtain here of what's going on. So if we could, I think there are more slides before this. If we could go back all the way to the first slide.
Apologies.
No
Not sure
worries.
why it brought me there. How's this look?
Perfect. Yeah, so this is a little peek behind the curtain. So this work is something that, of course, as Cheech and Chong is our primary client at Pillar. Um, this was for a piece of marketing promotion for a new product line that we were announcing in a certain state. So what we wanted to convey was what's a quick way, like with a very short turnaround, what's a quick way of conveying this through a colored pencil sketch. In my mind, that was the first thing I went to. What AI isn't great at right now, or at least it depends on the subject, is making people look like they actually are. So I mean, depending on the celebrity, of course, this can change. Like if you're making Johnny Depp, it's probably better at and trained on images that people are, depending on the level of celebrity, right? But the first thing was, okay, I want them facing the water. How can I convey this in a colored pencil sketch? So the first prompt I wrote was, and this is in Midjourney version 6, by the way, a colored pencil sketch of Cheech and Chong sitting on a wooden dock looking out at Lake Michigan. I denoted at the end of my prompt I want it to be made in version 6, and I always type in style raw. So just as a footnote as well, if you don't know what these tags are with the dashes after them, I encourage you to go look at Midjourney's just documentation. It has some really great just usage guides on what these are. But typically I always add these. So that's why you're seeing V6.0 and Style Raw. Style Raw just gets, in my opinion, a better result than excluding Style Raw. Anyways, that was the first iteration of what we did. If you look at the 4 images here, it's not really, they're wearing different stuff all the time. I would be hard pressed to find these even looking like Cheech and Chong in terms of like, if you look at their hair length, I think one of them has like gray dreads. So it's not like, these don't look like Cheech and Chong to me. They're wearing different things. It's not really conveying the outfits or the, like who they are if you want to see the back of them. And on the next slide, I'll show you, this is a much further iteration down the road. The prompt is much longer. And this is still using Midjourney version 6. And you can see the result that we got, which in my opinion, if you know Cheech and Chong, this is unmistakable. So I'll read a little bit of the prompt. It's a bit of an essay here, but it's kind of incredible the length of the prompt that you can achieve and the text coherence that Midjourney understands exactly what I want and puts it in the image. So a little bit, I'll read a little bit here. A colored pencil sketch of the comedy duo Cheech and Chong, both young looking with their backs turned away from the viewer. The young Cheech Marin is wearing his red knit beanie with short to medium dark hair, red suspenders, blah, blah, blah. I talk about Tommy Chong, what he's wearing, his denim jacket, his patches, his ripped jeans. But I talk about their complexion, their builds. I talk about even like looking as if they traverse long distances to arrive at their location. I got as specific as I could. I told Chat Midjourney that they're sitting at the edge of a wooden dock on Lake Michigan. Their backs are turned away from the viewer. The composition, even the framing, you can control so much about this. And it's like night and day. It shows what they're wearing. If you've seen them in movies, those are the outfits. It's pretty great. So it's a long leap. It's a far cry from just entering a very minimal prompt. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying it challenges you to think about your prompt. If you can type it out in words exactly how you want it to appear, Midjourney can get pretty dang close into approximating the output. So to me, that's pretty incredible. And on the next slide, it's really a journey too. Like, I don't expect anybody to immediately just be like, oh, I know exactly what I want. There are many generations that go into this. This is just a glimpse into how many generations I made. I mean, there were maybe 50. But the great thing is, if you're using Midjourney, using the turbo mode, especially if you're like paying for that, and I recommend like if you're a creative to pay for Midjourney and get that turbo mode, like these come out very quickly and you can really create at the speed of thought. So it's pretty incredible what you can make, but just the ultimate rule of thumb here is keep on prompting. And on the next slide, I think it's also nice to show that where things can go wrong. I mean, nothing's perfect with this. Things are iterating over time. Visual errors will happen. I got a lot of half-baked stuff like Cheech's beanie was like turned into a half beanie. I don't know what was going on there. His shirt on the right was like, cut out. Maybe it's very fashionable today, but I don't know. I don't know if it works in this image. And then you get some weird, like, I don't know, stuff out of horror movies, people, disfigured, twisted torsos. It just gets kind of funky. So you have to play with it. And you have to understand that this will happen. It's the fault of just over time, things will get better, but you just have to accept that this is the nature of it. And then on the next slide, I'd love to explain how we can fix these visual errors. So, I mean, not all is lost. Midjourney is a great tool. They rolled out this tool a while ago, and I think there are even more features coming out. but the very region button is a great one. Like if you upscale a certain image, once you click the very region button on the next slide, you can see it'll pop up a box where you can select a lasso tool or a rectangle marquee tool, and you can type in exactly what you want for that problem area. So, I mean, like, this is also competing with Photoshop too. I mean, I would prefer Midjourney over the other, but the downside of Midjourney is, of course, you can't upload your own images and use the lasso tool with that very region. So, but this is great for if you're prompting your own images, you can selectively change them out. And if you go on the next slide, you can see the result of that. So instead of seeing his back or his midriff, if you don't want that showing, you can have a striped t-shirt, or you can extend the denim jacket. So that's the great part, is that there are tools built in. And on the last slide here, I believe is the last slide, I just wanted to compare it to the same exact prompt, the essay, the huge wall of text that I showed you, comparing it to DALL-E 3. In my opinion, this got it entirely wrong. I mean, if you look at the text prompt that I said, I talked about the yellow tank top, it got it wrong. They're not facing the water, they're facing each other, right? So like even the text coherence, you can see over time using DALL-E 3 versus Midjourney version 6, in my opinion, no comparison. So that's the difference of the fidelity between the two. But that's just a little look into our process in using AI.
That was awesome. And I think too, the colored pencils, that you were so specific in terms of the visual that you wanted to use for this. And yeah, it's very different visuals from very different software that you're using.
For sure.
Let me go ahead and stop my share here. All right. And we see a couple comments here about how those visuals came out. So thank you so much. And I think this also brings us to a really nice place to invite Mark back in the conversation. Andrew, you mentioned that Cheech and Chong are one of your clients, so it's a little bit different, but I think that as we're thinking more and more about how we're using AI to create that high quality work, we always want to be keeping in mind the legal implications of that. So Mark, I'd love for you to share any initial reactions or shares after Andrew's presentation of the pieces he created.
Sure. And so I'm going to give a little sort of general background on copyright law and then kind of dive into specifics. And I'll comment on the images. And I'm also going to end up talking about what happens when you're using AI in a kind of, I'll call it a contract or a work for hire situation, as opposed to just creating something that you might display in a gallery. So hopefully I'll work through all those in the course of my discussion with you. The first thing I want to just point out is, so if you're creating a work using Cheech and Chong, they're famous people. They have a right of publicity. That's the right to not have their images used for commercial purposes without their consent. In Andrew's case, they're actually hiring Andrew to create images for their use. But if you're using famous people in your work, well, even if you're using anyone, it's not just famous people, they have the right to not have that happen. And it's not copyright infringement, it's called a right of publicity. It's a state law as opposed to a federal law, varies from state to state, very protective in Tennessee, thanks to Elvis, and in Washington, thanks to Jimi Hendrix and Kurt Cobain, less restrictive in New York, but still recognized everywhere in the United States, and to some extent internationally as well. So you always want to have permission to use famous people if you're going to do something commercial with the work. Otherwise, you're potentially liable for having to pay damages to those people for I'll call it the unauthorized use of commercial images. The more interesting questions, though, I think, are the copyright questions, which is when you're using an AI tool, AI is trained on thousands, millions really of images, each of which is entitled to be protected under copyright law. And so how does that affect your ability to protect your own work? And are you potentially liable for copyright infringement for copying? So let's maybe go to my slides, and I want to show a couple of sort of visual examples of how this plays out. Okay, so yeah, let's flip through. That's my title slide. So quick overview, copyright protects, so copyright has been in the US statute book since 1790. In fact, it's in the Constitution. There's a section of Article 1 that protects both inventions and works of authorship. So it goes back to that. And the copyright law has been revised over the course of years, most recently in 1976, and then again in 1998 to deal with some digital and internet issues. But copyright law does a relatively good job, I think, of balancing the rights of creators to have their works protected and to be able to commercially exploit them, and then the rights of creators and other people to basically be able to use creative works in ways that basically enhance, human progress and human appreciation of works of art. So copyright law sort of really focuses on creative works, though. So what's not protected by copyright law is important to recognize. So factual information, ideas, processes, methods, sort of the factual world, so to speak, is not protected by copyright law. However, any minimal amount of creativity is protected. So once you have sort of a somewhat creative arrangement, even a factual material, that can be protected. Kind of a good, if somewhat old-fashioned example is the white pages of the telephone book. So a listing of names and addresses and phone numbers that's alphabetical. That's obvious, not creative, not protectable. But various yellow pages, which had to basically decide, whether they're going to call doctors or physicians or medical personnel or whatever. And, are they going to have neighborhood listings or not neighborhood listings? That minimal level of creativity protects the that sort of creative arrangement of the factual information. It doesn't protect the factual information itself. And so databases can be protected if they have some minimal creativity. So I don't want to dwell on this. So let's go to the next slide. And right. So if you're the copyright owner, you can't control use of your work. So the work can be basically read or viewed, but you can control basically its public dissemination. So any reproductions at all, even if they're not distributed, are prohibited. So reproduction is an exclusive right of the copyright owner. So you can't make a copy. You can't distribute copies either in physical form or digitally. Preparing derivative works, that's so works based on another work, a prequel, a sequel, an extension, a modification. Those are all things that require permission of the copyright owner. And then private performance and private display aren't prohibited, but public performance and public display, again, require permission from the copyright owner. So let's see how these play out in sort of some real world situations in the pre-AI world. So next slide. So I'm going to take a look at a couple New Yorker covers that were the subject of copyright litigation in the 1980s and 1990s, because I think these illustrate these provisions really well for a group like this group. You have this pen and ink drawing, the New York hairline, that appeared in a New York gallery. There were some numerous prints of it were made. Several were sold. It was on display for quite a number of months. Wasn't the subject of any great amount of publicity. Didn't receive a lot of attention in the press, but it was definitely in the public sphere, available to the public. A couple of years later, this New Yorker cover showed up. And the artist sued the New Yorker for copyright infringement. I'd be curious. I won't ask because there's so many people on. If I'm doing this live, I like to take a poll of the room, but I don't think we can do that easily. But I'll just get to the, I guess I'll cut to the chase and say the New Yorker won the case, and they won it because what's copied is really the concept of a punker with a hairline in the shape of the New York skyline. And that concept as a concept is not protectable under copyright law, only the specific way it gets expressed. And so here, kind of everything is different about it. The skyline is rendered differently. The profile is different. It's obviously colored. And just sort of the way the concept is expressed is totally different. So this actually was a win on summary judgment. In other words, the court determined that no reasonable jury could have concluded that there was copyright infringement here. So the test for copyright infringement is if a work is publicly available, you have to show substantial similarity. You don't have to show that it's an exact copy. But again, here, the creative elements were copied. So let's go to the next slide for a contrasting example. So a few years earlier, this New Yorker cover appeared, the one on the left. It's kind of the famous Saul Steinberg poster, The World from Ninth Avenue, View of the World from Ninth Avenue, sorry. And some years later, the movie Moscow on the Hudson was made, and the movie studio created this poster for it, you know, clearly copying the concept of the Saul Steinberg poster. And the question is, well, is this the same, you know, should the same result occur here because they just copied the concept? And the answer is no. If you really zoom in, what was copied, in fact, was not just Steinberg's sort of concept, but the way he rendered it. So if you look at the buildings in detail, they're done in the style of Saul Steinberg. So Steinberg won this suit in contrast to the pen and ink artist, Thomas Kerr was his name in the other case. One thing that's kind of funny is if you really zoom in on this picture, you can see that the buildings aren't exactly the same. They have the number of floors is different, the number of windows is different. And it's like a lawyer advised the artist creating this, well, I know you want to make it look like Saul Steinberg, but you can't just copy his building and stick it into your poster. You have to change it. So the artist, you know, whoever created this movie poster dutifully made some changes, but they didn't change this creative style. And so that's, you know, victory for Saul Steinberg in this case. So how does that play into the sort of the AI world? Well, let's look at the next slide, yeah. So I asked Andrew to prepare this kind of as a follow-up once I saw his presentation. I wanted to see, so if we ask for a prompt in the style of a very famous work here, the Bookends cover from Simon and Garfunkel's 1968 album Bookends. This is a photograph by Richard Avedon, the album cover on the left. And Andrew, your prompt was, why don't you take a minute and explain exactly what prompt you used?
Yeah, exactly. So I just pretty blatantly tried to copy it as much as I can and typed in Cheech and Chong sitting next to each other in the style of the Bookends album cover by Simon and Garfunkel. So tried to replicate it exactly. And this was one of the results that I got.
So the question is, you know, could Richard Avedon sue for copyright infringement? He definitely could file a case. I don't think it would be successful because it's really the concept of the way the album cover is arranged that's copied. And you know, no one has a sort of basically hold on having two heads leaning together. So it's not quite enough of a copy, you know, and then you have to account for the fact that Cheech and Chong have a very different look than Simon and Garfunkel. So, you know, I would call this plagiarism. And actually, this is probably a good time to say that plagiarism and copyright infringement aren't the same thing. Plagiarism is when you copy something and you don't acknowledge what you're copying. So you can give credit, which kind of takes you out of plagiarism and still be a copyright infringer. And you can also plagiarize if you copy something, but what you copy is a concept or a set of facts that aren't protectable under copyright law, or something that's in the public domain because it's old or wasn't protected for whatever reason. So I think this is just an interesting illustration, and it, you know, another question that we'll come to later is, so does the artist who creates the Cheech and Chong portrait here, in this case Andrew, can he protect his work from being exploited by others using the right by registering a copyright and protecting it? And I think that's very questionable whether that could be done given the simplicity of the prompt. So we'll talk about that a little later, because that's kind of like a second level question. So let me pause there. I guess, Ashley, let me give you a chance to catch up, and I can sort of move on if you want, or I can expand out on some of the things I've said.
Yeah, so I think, I believe the next thing we're going to talk about is a little bit on the flip side of that, how creatives protect their work, unless there's anything else that you wanted to share to wrap up.
No, I'm happy to move on to that. Yeah.
Perfect.
I think if there's one thing too that I could chime in on in regards to the Cheech and Chong and Simon and Garfunkel thing, I think that as a creative, I would never encourage, I would actively discourage people from using prompts that quite literally inject an artist's name into them and say, hey, do it in the style of, let's say, a Shepard Fairey poster, and you use the artist's name. Like, don't, basically, the guiding line here is just don't steal. Like, you can copy, you can be influenced by style, I should say. And if you understand the style cues and the words and the keywords that go into making like what you like about a Shepard Fairey poster or any other piece of design by an artist, understand what that style can be described as, and then you could use that as your prompt. But I mean, blatantly just putting in an artist's name or a photographer's name, obviously it shouldn't be done.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I would say right, the issue from a copyright law point of view is you can actually, in some ways, get away with putting in, I'm not saying it's right, and it is, I think plagiarism, but if you put in an artist's name, copyright law protects specific work. So in the case of the Richard Avedon, actually we'll come to those examples, so maybe we should just keep going. But an artist doesn't get protection for his body of work, he gets protection for individual works. And so if you're copying an artist's style, the question will be, do you overlap with an existing work that's copied? And that's going to be questionable. It's not necessarily right, but morally, but it may not be copyright infringement. So I'm going to, Ashley, I'll come back to this slide. Let's go ahead and look at just coincidentally, I picked Richard Avedon. So I took a few images that were in a New Yorker article about a year ago, written by Adam Gopnik. Very good article on kind of AI and visual works that I encourage people to look at. So Gopnik just wanted to sort of play around and see, how things work, how this worked. And so I assume he has a Havanese dog, asked for a Havanese to be depicted in the style of Richard Avedon, who coincidentally is the same artist that did the Bookends album cover. So you've got this work. It looks like a lot of Richard Avedon's portraits if you view a gallery of those or whatever. But it's clearly not an infringement of any work of Richard Avedon. I don't know that he's taken a picture of a Havanese. And if so, that would be protected and that would be a good claim. But if there was no picture of a Havanese that Richard Avedon had done, it would be very difficult to pursue a case for copyright infringement based on this work. So let's go to the next slide. Again, here we have a prompt, a Beatles album cover in the style of Magritte. So we have two potential issues. We have the Beatles have their right of publicity not to be exploited for commercial purposes without permission. But if you don't use the Beatles name and you don't really show the Beatles faces, the question is, are these the Beatles or is it just some generic British group with haircuts in the style of the Beatles? You can't really tell. Magritte, this doesn't look like anything of Magritte's that I recognize, but it is in that style. So probably would be clear. Again, it would be kind of I would call it somewhat of a plagiarized work, but that I don't think it would be copyright infringement. Let's go to the last, one more slide, or I guess we have a couple more. This gets to be a little closer. Here we have painting a 70s disco in the style of Seurat, and Seurat actually had a picture of, wasn't a 70s disco, but a Paris dance hall. I would guess in the I don't know if it was the 1880s or so. These pictures are similar, but again, I don't think there would be copyright infringement. This would be a closer question, but when you look at the two works side by side, I don't know that the pointillist technique itself is not protectable under copyright, and the renderings of the images are different. It's interesting, I think, how much better the image on the left, which was generated by a human, is than the one on the right, but that's a different question. And then we've got one more example.
Andrew, I did see you unmute yourself. I was curious if you had a creative, a comment about this or.
Oh, I didn't. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I always got to check. Sorry about that, Mark. Here we go.
And so finally, we have a painting an illustration that looks a lot like a Winslow Homer painting. and potentially I think could have some issues. Basically you have a dog inserted into it, but this is quite a bit similar to some works of Winslow Homer that depict this kind of sort of beach scene. And I think a claim would be possible here. Whether it would be sustained, would be an interesting question. One of the problems that the person who created this would have if they were defending that claim is the prompt is very simple. They've asked for it to be a copy of Winslow Homer. The AI, model clearly had information about beach scenes, and so what's come back is something that's very close to a Winslow Homer painting in reality, even though that's not the way the model necessarily works. So I would say the lesson here is, as an artist, you want to make sure that what you've created isn't something that's really a direct copy or a close copy of an actual work by an artist, if you're worried about copyright infringement. So let's go. So we can leave this up for a minute. The question of how you best protect your works is true. Is really, it's the same for AI generated works to some degree as it is for all works, which is, if you have something that you've created that you think has commercial potential, you should try to register it with the Copyright Office. It costs about $55. I think you can do it online. You don't need a lawyer. And that gives you great leverage if somebody subsequently uses your work without your consent. You have the ability to collect attorney's fees in any lawsuit, and you have the right to what are called statutory damages instead of having to prove actual damages. If you don't register the work before it gets copied or infringed otherwise by someone else, then you have to prove actual damages and you don't get your attorney's fees. So that's something that, Congress has decided they want to have an incentive for people to register their works with the Library of Congress, which is where the U.S. Copyright Office is. And so that's the benefit of registering it. And when you go, to enforce, I can tell you as a lawyer that's had to defend lots of basically unauthorized uses of photographs or music in various, commercial instances, the situation is a lot different if the work is registered. We typically want to just settle those claims and not have a chance of having them go to court. And if the work is not registered, they're pretty easy for a commercial entity to blow off unless the artist is actually, successfully marketing the work otherwise. Now for AI works, I think, go to the next slide if I remember. I think that's when we actually touch on this. So yeah.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get this one out. One sec.
It's okay. So this is a kind of a brand new question that's come up in the last few years with the Copyright Office. Can works generated by AI be protected by copyright? And the position of the Copyright Office is the only works that are protectable are those that are created by a human being. So what does that mean in the context of AI? Well, this question came up sort of originally when photography was first put under the copyright statute. Could the taking of, there were some arguments that, well, photographs can't be protected under copyright because they're just done by a machine. And that view did not prevail. And the view was photographers put enough into, basically setting up the work, deciding how it's going to be lit and so on, that there's, protectable elements there. Then the next, I would say the more interesting development was the so-called monkey selfie. So there's a famous picture of a monkey kind of leering at the camera that was taken by the monkey grabbing the camera clicker that was on a chain, and the camera was set up to take a selfie basically. I think it was PETA sued on behalf of the monkey, arguing that the monkey had the copyright in the selfie and it couldn't be exploited by the photographer. And PETA lost that case. The court decided no, only humans have the right to copyright, and the Copyright Office has basically developed that position. So you have to have human authorship. And the question is, what is human authorship in the context of AI? Because the AI engine or model is generating the work. So let's go to the next slide. So the Copyright Office actually issued, they're still in the process of basically taking comments. They've got various notices in the Federal Register, but they've put out an initial guidance as of almost exactly a year ago that when you apply, you have to disclose the use of AI, and there has to be substantial human involvement. And so I would say the involvement of Adam Gopnik in creating the works that I just discussed is not substantial enough to justify giving a copyright to Adam Gopnik. In contrast, the prompt that I'll call it the essay prompt that Andrew showed you, I think that would be sufficient, possibly standing alone, but definitely would be sufficient if, you actually did what Andrew did, which was go through many iterations, keep, look at different things, change things. So the more human involvement you have, the better your case will be for protection. And if you're giving a simple 5-word prompt, that's not going to be protectable. But if you give a very detailed prompt and you work over 17 drafts of the image and you change 100 different aspects of it, that's clearly going to be protectable, I think. And a few artists have tried to present cases in which the work was basically purely generated by a short prompt, and they've tried to protect those. The Copyright Office has not allowed that. It's gone to court. The courts have upheld the Copyright Office. So that's where we are in the United States with that. Since I'm talking about litigation now, we can go back to my litigation slide. It's about 7 slides back, roughly. I want to the other question is the use of your works as artists by AI for training materials. Thank you. That's the one. So that's an unknown. It's in litigation. There's about a dozen or so cases that cover sort of all different types of works, and the plaintiffs in the cases, it's really interesting collection. So, in terms of large companies, you have Getty Images and the New York Times, each basically alleging that their works were used without permission for the training of AI models, and they're entitled to basically recover damages for that unauthorized use of their copyright protected materials. And then you also have, I'll call it a parallel set of authors, one led by Sarah Silverman, the other led by former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. They each have cases pending, again, for having the works that they authored be used to train AI engines. So it's an unknown now whether that's a legitimate use under copyright law or it infringes, the right of reproduction, distribution, and so on. It's not an easy question, to be honest, because reading a book is not protected under copyright law. No one can stop you from reading their copyrighted work just because they own the copyright in it if you have the physical work. And the AI engines they're not keeping copies of the works in their database. That's not how, the neural networks work. They're basically looking at them, comparing things, and then kind of moving on. And then when you put in a prompt, the AI engine is just predicting what the next word or the next image should be based on the information that you've given. And I think with images, it may be a little different than it is with text questions, but it's not generating an image by taking an image that it has. It's creating an image based on information from the images, and the information in the images themselves aren't protected. So these cases are all sort of, I would say, at a relatively early stage, and there's lots of different proposals floating around about whether there should be some sort of fee imposed for the use of the materials for training, which would be the subject of potential statute, which would be a legitimate thing that could be done. The other people using the works, Google, Microsoft, and so on, OpenAI, they also have what's called a fair use argument, that although they're making a temporary copy or whatever, they're not using the materials themselves for commercial purposes, and they're only using them for essentially training, which is an educational purpose. And that would be the argument for fair use in short. I'm not basically saying which one will win or which one should win. So let me pause there again, Ashley, and give you a chance to catch up and throw some questions at me if need be. I don't want to keep talking.
I mean, it's interesting just to hear the parallels of both of your perspectives, being the evolution of this technology, it's been constant. So whether it's the technology itself that is evolving and what are become kind of more favored players in the game, and then also the legality pieces of it. It's all very interesting. And just, I also appreciate you providing the visuals of things that we might feel a little bit more comfortable with. You know, the New Yorker examples, I feel like really were able to put it a little bit in a make it more sense for me visually. I'm a visual learner for that as well. I do have a couple actual questions from Andrew that were pre-submitted questions, and I do want to take this opportunity. I know that Kevin has been fielding a lot of the Q&As, but as we are thinking more and more about the idea that Mark brought in terms of how much creative and human interaction creates like the validity of this work. I'd love to hear from you, Andrew, like as someone who mentors creatives and as someone who hires creatives in your role, what are you looking for as candidates are showing how they're using AI in their own work?
Yeah, so if I'm taking the standpoint of like, hey, we're looking to hire somebody, what does that candidate show that's promising? If I hold up two candidates and one of them has prompted AI to get all of their imagery, and they're not doing much else besides just typing in a text prompt and boom, this is my work. See, I created this. That's not it's not useful. Anybody can type in an AI prompt, right? Like, show me your work, show me the process. If you're using AI in your process, it's not a bad thing. I mean, at this point, almost everybody's using AI. The creative idea should be front and center. It doesn't have to be unapparent that you've used AI, but really like, can you show that you've thought through this process in order to arrive at this piece of creative? Otherwise, if you're just typing, I did it, look, I made Cheech and Chong on a lake, and it was like that one sentence prompt. Like, it's not showing thought put into the design. It's not showing that you're thinking through the problem that you're trying to solve. Really, the question is, can you solve this design problem? And did you solve it effectively? And what were the steps you took to get there? And that, to me, shows somebody who is talented as opposed to just anybody who can type in a single prompt.
Now that you mentioned the prompts itself and how you're drafting them, and you gave us one specific example, but one of the questions that was submitted is how long did all those prompts take? Is there a timeline that you have now been able to in all your practice that you'd be able to answer that question, or does it truly vary just on what the technology is spitting back at you?
Yeah, it just depends. I mean, once you start to learn, especially using AI as a tool for a thinking partner, you get faster at executing these concepts. I think someone who's just starting out will be like, well, really, like, how do I think about this? What style do I want to put this in? Like, what am I writing here? What is the goal that I'm trying to solve that AI can help me with? I mean, I did that prompt for that particular graphic, if I can remember, maybe in 20 minutes. I mean, but it's not really a benchmark, in my opinion, to look for. Like, you will get faster as you use tools, as you get more adept with those tools and more familiar with the processes behind them. What it does is it just speeds up your entire process. It doesn't take over your entire process. It just helps you get the job done quicker, which is really the end game with AI. It's to help us get things done quicker.
Absolutely. Move through those ideas faster. Now, there's been, like I mentioned earlier in the conversation, this fear of AI. You as a creative, you as a creating all of these different works, do you think AI will take over people's jobs from your perspective and experience?
Yeah, that's a pretty a big question right now.
You get it a
I think,
lot.
yeah, I mean, no doubt, for good reason, right? I don't think that there is a question that it's just a question of when, not if. I don't mean to sound like society's going to end, it's going to take all of our jobs. AI has and automation has already taken and augmented a lot of jobs. Um, when the camera was invented, painters were upset that you could take one picture and perfectly replicate reality. When the printing press was invented, all the people who hand wrote books were like, fuming, right? So automation happens. That's what technology moves forward. Jobs augment. It is just the nature of economics and reality right now. And more so with AI. It's a tool. We can't take for granted, though, the unique experience that we have as humans that are using that tool. What I like to bring up is that everybody has a unique experience. If you tell somebody from France to draw a bridge, and then you tell somebody from San Francisco to draw a bridge, they might have two totally different notions of what a bridge is, the materials that are used, the buildings that surround it, the length of the bridge, the kind of cars that are on it. Our experience in the world through our sense organs changes our perception about the world and changes the style in which we approach problem solving. I think you cannot discount that. And as a human in the driver's seat, as using AI and these tools, that gives unique experience that you cannot simply get by typing in one prompt after another if you're just a robot prompting, right? Or if you're telling ChatGPT to prompt it. But at the same time, AI does level the playing field. While you may not be able to rely on hard skills like you have in the past, as they're being augmented by AI, it lets you bring these creative ideas to life at very low cost. So anybody around the world who has $20 to spare for Midjourney can now create these awesome ideas. So I think what it does is it just really elevates the playing field, and good ideas will float to the top. You'll start to see a lot of great looking images with bad concepts behind it. But I think that the people who have been doing design, been doing creative work, are used to concepting really good ideas. And I think that using those tools in the hands of people who are very capable in the creative field, I think will go that much further. So I think my overall message is, like, if you're close to the idea of change, of course you're going to fall behind. Times change all the time. You have to embrace it. But there's also always room for the craft of creative. How we do things changes, but it doesn't mean that you have to all of a sudden stop painting. I mean, just because photography exists doesn't mean that painters stop existing. Just because the printing press existed doesn't mean that typographers or people creating books by hand stopped existing, right? It may not be the default way to do things, but there's still room in the space to master a craft and have people value that craft. So that's what I would say about that.
I greatly appreciate that insight. And as you and I were talking, we were talking even about how creatives had shared their work in the past. I mean, there used to be the physical portfolios. I mean, even Creative Circle has a history of like sending messengers to those portfolios to the clients to see people's work. And now that work is available on digital portfolios, on websites. And we saw that evolution within our industry. So before we close out, I did see a couple questions just about like staying on trends, right? And you'd mentioned a couple like content creators that you'd followed in the past to help people continue to learn about the different options that are available to them when it comes to AI. Do you have a couple that you would like to share?
Yeah, in terms of channels that have just been really useful for me, I love AI Explained. That's a really great channel to keep up with the trends of AI as things are evolving so fast. I mean, by the time that you invited me to this webinar, so many things have evolved in the AI landscape. It's just mind blowing just to look at, Sora by OpenAI. I mean, I encourage everyone to go look at what Sora is if you don't know. Sora. It's an incredible text to video generator that OpenAI is working on. So that channel, AI Explained, is a really good way to keep up with the fast-paced changes. Sebastian Kampf, Kamph, he gives really great tutorials on Stable Diffusion. Stable Diffusion is something we haven't talked about in this webinar, but it's if you want to get your hands really more dirty than Midjourney and just really more fine-tuned, I'd recommend looking up Sebastian Kampf on YouTube. He has some great tutorials around Stable Diffusion and hyper-specific creative applications for AI. And then the last one, I would say, just more broadly in the field of AI, again, is 2-minute papers. And there's a doctor, a man with a PhD who runs that channel, just really, really intelligent, really good at recapping all of the things that are going on with AI. And those are the 3 channels that I like to keep up with. Again, they're AI Explained, Sebastian Kampf, and 2-minute papers.
Thank you so much. And Kevin is sharing those now in the chat. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Andrew and Mark for joining us again for our second iteration of Conversations with Creatives. We're seeing so much appreciation in the chat. This was a really wonderful discussion. I know that we all are walking away having learned something, having gained insight, and really interested in continuing with our journey of AI. So we'll be wrapping it up here, and you will all be receiving the recording of this if you've registered. We'd love to see additional feedback that you have. I believe there'll be a survey that will be shared as well. If there's additional, we saw some things in the questions that we weren't able to cover today. So themes or topics, AI related or not. I mean, this is a very hot topic right now, so we want to continue in this. But if there's other things that you would like us to cover in Conversations for Creatives, we want to hear from you. So thank you all so much. Again, thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Mark. And we hope to talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.